Hello chess fans and welcome to Chess 5, and today I am going to show you the game between Rashid Nesmedinov versus Oleg L. Chernikov. I am not sure that I am pronouncing their name right or wrong, but okay. This game is going to be epic because you all guys are going to see the greatest queen sacrifice played in chess history, and you are going to love this game. So without any further ado, let's dive into the game. So Rashid with the white pieces started with 1e4 and black replied with c5, the Sicilian defense. Here we have knight to f3, knight to c6. Here white played d4, c into d4, knight into d4, g6, the hyper accelerated dragon. And the plan of playing g6 for black is, now black is preparing to play bishop to g7 and targeting the knight on d4. So after g6, white played knight to c3, developing his pieces. Here we have bishop to g7. Here white played bishop to e3, developing the piece and also protecting the knight on d4. So black simply developed the piece by playing knight to f6. Here bishop to c4, castle, bishop to b3, because bishop b3 was played because there could be some attacks after queen c7 and there could be some discover attacks by capturing the knight, and the queen is attacking the bishop on c4. That is why bishop b3 was played. After bishop b3, black played knight to g4, directly going for the bishop on e3, because after capturing the bishop on e3, f into e3 and white pawn structure would be very bad. So after knight g4, the knight is hanging on g4, so white simply captured the knight on g4, and here black captured the knight on d4. So here white played queen to h4. Here white it's not better move to capture the knight because with the bishop, because after bishop into d4, now black dark color bishop is very strong. That's why at the place of capturing the knight on d4, the Rashid decided to move the queen to h4, and here black played queen to a5, and now the knight is pinned on c3, and after moving the knight from the d4 square, there could be some attacks on the knight on c3. That's why after queen f5, white played castle, simply castle, and here black played bishop f6, a normal move, attacking the queen on h4, and the bishop is protected by the pawn on e7. So if there would be any person, I think even Magnus Carlsen, I think what anyone would play, perhaps queen h6, perhaps queen g4. These moves are the most natural moves and common moves come to a human mind. But what Rashid played after bishop f6 was a spectacular shot by him. He played queen into f6. Wow, this move is epic. He just sacrificed the queen because of bishop. We are going to see the benefits of sacrificing the queen later, but a better move could be to play queen h6, but by playing queen h6 the game would not be much so interesting. So that's why, okay, queen into f6 was not a bad move, it's a fine move. Black is only slightly better in this position. Here the plan is, if black captures the queen now with the pawn, then white will simply capture the knight with the bishop, and here actually it's two minor pieces against a queen. Although practically it looks like black would be winning, but it's not, because if you see the d5 square is very weak, and for now the pawn on f6 is also hanging. So the normal plan of white could be to simply play knight d5, capturing up the pawn with the knight with a check, and whenever the king will come in dark squares, he will move the knight and there would be some discover attacks, and white would be simply better in this position. So that's why at the place of capturing up the queen with the pawn, he first played knight to e2 check, a very nice move, because now comes knight into e2 and comes e into f6, and by giving check on e2, we can see here there could be some plans of playing knight to d5, and now the knight is on e2, so it will take time to come on d5. So after e into f6, Rashid played knight to c3, and here comes rook to e8, developing the piece and also putting some pressure on the e4 pawn. So here white simply played knight to d5, here attacking the f6 pawn. Here black cannot capture the pawn on e4 because after knight into f6 it's a check and the rook is hanging on e4. That's why after knight to d5, black played rook to e6, protecting the pawn on f6. And here after rook to e6, Rashid played bishop to d4, creating more pressure on the f6 pawn. And after bishop to d4, black played king to g7, protecting the f6 pawn. So here comes rook ad1, simply developing the pieces. And here black played d6. And if you look this position closely, here the pieces of black is very blocked, and like all the pieces are in defensive mode, and white pieces are just very nicely placed. The bishop is looking at the rook, the bishop is looking at the pawn and the king, the knight is looking at the pawn. Perhaps there could be some deadly ideas with f4 f5, and the rook would be open. The rook can be played like rook d3, perhaps rook f3, and there could be some many discovered attacks. And as we know, it's two pieces against a queen. But if you look the queen on a5 closely, the queen is doing nothing on a5. Queen is just sitting over there, and that's it. So that's why in this position white is slightly better. So after d6, white played rook to d3. The plan is to play perhaps rook f3, creating more pressure on the f6 pawn. So black played bishop d7 because he have to develop his pieces. So white simply played rook to f3, creating more pressure. And here black played bishop to b5, pressurizing the rook on f1. And here Rashid played bishop to c3, attacking the queen on a5. So queen gone back to d8, and here comes knight into f6, capturing up the pawn on f6. Here black cannot capture the knight because here comes bishop into f6, and after queen into f6, rook into f6, king into f6, and here simply rook d1. And if you count the pawns in this position, white is having 7 pawns and black is having 6 pawns, and even the d6 pawn is very weak, and this is completely winning position for white. That's why rook into f6 is not possible. And in the game, black played bishop to e2, which was a blunder. Only single move equalizes the game in this position, which is rook to c8, and this is extremely hard to find. Like developing the pieces, there could be many deadly attacks after knight moves. It's a check, so there could be deadly attacks, but nothing is going to happen because after rook to c8, white gives knight to h5 check. Here king to g8, here bishop into e6, capturing up the rook. Here comes f into e6, here knight to f6 check, king to g7, rook to d1, and here comes rook into c3, capturing up the bishop because bishop is very strong on c3, looking at the king. That's why rook into c3, b into c3, and this position is equal because although it's queen against 2 rook, but it's an equal position. That's why rook c8 was the best move in this position, but what played in the game was bishop e2. Even if you try to capture the f1 rook, this is not going to work because now comes the only winning move for white, which is knight g4 check, because here comes king g8, here comes bishop into e6. You cannot capture the bishop because knight h6 is a checkmate. So queen g5 is the best move according to engine, but still it's winning for white because here comes bishop into f7 check, king f8, here comes bishop into g6 check. If you play king to e7, now simply comes bishop to f6 check, and black is losing the queen. And if you go even, king to g8, now comes here comes knight to f6 check, and it doesn't matter which square you go. If you go king to f8, now then simply knight into h7 check, and the queen is lost. And if it doesn't matter which square you go, white is going to simply play knight into h7, king into g6, and the queen is lost on g5. So this was the idea. So you can't even capture the rook. So here black simply made a blunder by playing bishop e2, and after bishop e2 white played knight into h7 check. Here king have to go to g8. You cannot capture the rook because now comes rook, sorry about that, here comes rook into f7 check, and after king to h6 here comes bishop into g7 check, king to h5, here comes bishop into e6. I believe me guys, this is completely winning position for white. That's why king g8 was played, and here white played rook to h3. Here white cannot capture the rook on e6 because now comes bishop into f3, and the rook on f3 is very important because if here comes knight to here knight f6 check, king f8, g into f3, here f into e6, and it's an equal position. Actually it's slightly better position for black. That's why after king g8 rook h3 was played, and now the plan is to capture the rook on e6. So black simply played rook to e5, and many of you are thinking that why black is just giving up the rook on e5. Actually you cannot capture the rook on e5 because after d5 what will you play with the white pieces? Because the bishop on c3 is very nice. It is covering all the black square, and it is also making the knight to come back to f6, and after sacrificing the after getting an exchange plus, the knight cannot go to anywhere from h7 because all the squares are covered by the queen. So if you, and the bishop is attacking the rook as well. So if you play rook e1 attacking the bishop, now comes queen to d2 attacking the rook. So here rook b1, so here comes bishop to d8, very nice, bishop to d1, a very nice move by black, and now the simple threat is to checkmate. So white is going to play g3 of course to not get checkmated, and now simply comes queen e1 check, king g2, queen into e4 check, king g1, queen e1 check, king g2, and now comes rook to d8, and this game over. Black is simply going to come up with his rook, and it's going to be checkmate. That's why after rook e5 it's a very nice move played by black, but white cannot capture the rook, so white played f4, the best move for white in this position. Now the pawn is attacking the rook on e5, so after f4 black simply captured the rook on f1. Here comes king into f1, and black played rook to c8. Here comes bishop to d4. Here f into e5 was also fine move. Here comes the d into e5 and not capturing up the pawn. Here comes rook to d3, the best move for white in this position, because after queen b6 white is going to play now bishop into e5, and you cannot capture the knight first of all, because after rook h3, king g8, rook h8 is a checkmate. That's why after rook to c8 Rashid chose not to capture the rook, but he played bishop to d4 because there could be some ideas to capture the bishop, and this was also a fine move. So after bishop d4 black played b5, trying to gain some space on the queen side and perhaps playing a4 and taking squares from the bishop on b3. So white simply grabbed the knight back to g5. Here comes rook to c7 because the bishop and the knight was attacking the pawn on f7, and still comes bishop into f7 check, a spectacular shot by Rashid. Here after rook into f7, here's your chance guys. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the only move which wins for white in this position. Okay, so to those who have found the right move, congratulations, you are great at forking the pieces, because now comes rook to h8 check. Wow, it's a very nice move by Rashid, because here the king is forced to capture the rook, because if you will move the rook, if you will move the king, the queen is hanging on d8, so you have to capture the rook on h8. And now comes knight into f7 check, giving a check, and the queen is also gone on d8. So king h7 was played, and here white simply grabbed the queen on d8, and rook into e4 was played, attacking the bishop and the pawn, and white simply played knight c6 back, protecting the bishop. And here comes rook into f4, check, king e2, and after move number 33, white played king e2, black resigned the game, and white won the game with the white piece. It was a epic game, and if you count the material in this position, white is having 5 pawns, black is having 4 pawns, and it's rook against 2 minor pieces, and it's completely winning for white. That's why black resigned the game. It was the best queen sacrifice played in the history of chess. And guys, if you also like this game, I think you must like this game. So if you like this game, then please like to my video. If you are new to my channel, then please subscribe to my channel. I will come up with these new videos for you, so please keep tuned. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.